I recently finished my PhD in philosophy. The most important lesson I learned is also one of the simplest. The easiest way for me to explain it to you is to introduce you to a few of my friends. So I'd like you to meet Cedric. This is a picture of me and Cedric, the most beautiful, dynamic, intelligent little troublemaker I've ever lived with. Cedric and I got to know each other very well, and from getting to know Cedric, I learned a lot about a cat's emotions. Cedric would yowl with excitement, and he would purr with contentment. Toward the end of his life, he was terminally ill, and he would moan in agony. How many of you have gotten to know the emotions of an animal? Maybe it was your companion, dog or cat, or someone else. I knew that would be most of us. And I'm sure you'll agree that if you know an animal is suffering and you can do something about it, we should do something about the animal suffering, just like we took Cedric to the vet. To extrapolate a bit, everybody's suffering matters. It doesn't matter that they're not a human being. And I knew this when I was 5 years old from being a little rascal puller of cats' tails. So how can this be the most mind-blowing thing I learned in my whole PhD? Well, I'd like you to meet Kelly, my friend, and her companion animal, Snow. Snow is right there on the shoulder. Like most chickens, Snow is at least as sophisticated emotionally and socially as a cat like Cedric. Chickens can keep track of up to 100 individuals at once. They have up to 30 calls that they'll use to express their feelings and desires. And Kelly reports that Snow will get in her lap and purr with contentment, just like a cat. The difference between Snow and Cedric is that Snow has a much darker past. Snow was raised on a factory farm, as you can see by how her beak has been cut. It was only when I was 25 that I learned the power and importance of the truth that everybody's suffering matters. In the depths of my studies of philosophy, I learned a simple truth about justice and some powerful, mind-blowing facts about oppression. The simple truth about justice is that similar interests deserve similar treatment. For example, if you and I both have an interest in not having our nose cut off our face, we both should have that interest respected equally, regardless of our gender, our race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. Tall and short, young and old, we deserve to have that interest respected. And in fact, discrimination, I think, is the rejection of this very truth. Racism and sexism just are treating similar interests unequally. Now, our society has been racist and sexist and homophobic for so long, but we've labeled these terms, and we've fought against them. It's an ongoing fight. But what I've learned by studying philosophy is there's a further form of discrimination, so commonplace and so pervasive that we barely even see it. It's called speciesism. What I've learned is that for most of my life, I have been a speciesist, and in many ways, I still am. The fact is, some individuals are born into our world, and just because of the group they're born into, they get branded, mutilated, and killed prematurely. But others with the same capacities are born into a different group, and they get grooming presents for Christmas, and they get to live long, happy lives. What our society forgets and overlooks is the simple truth that everybody's suffering matters. Science speaks abundantly clearly that all vertebrates can feel pain. Many invertebrates, too, very plausibly feel pain, whether it's octopi, squid. The jury, I think, is still out about insects. But the truth is, if somebody can feel pain, it's important, and we need to reduce that if we can. I want to talk about some examples of speciesism, and I want to show you just how pervasive it is. But then I want to offer some hope that we as a society can overcome speciesism, and we as individuals can overcome speciesism. We could talk about discrimination against the millions of animals that we make into clothing, the millions that we kill and harm for our own entertainment. But by far the largest group are those that get made into food. 56 billion land animals are killed for food every single year. And although that number is unfathomable, it's dwarfed by the number of aquatic animals, which is around 1 trillion, some estimates 2 trillion aquatic animals killed for food every single year. Now, I submit to you the bottom line problem is commodification, treating someone as something, when in fact these creatures are someone, just like Cedric is someone and just like Snow is someone. Today I want to talk about 5 injustices in the poultry industry, but keep in mind very similar injustices are true of fish, cows, pigs. There's even a lot of suffering among wild animals, so this is certainly a partial list. The first number to try to fathom is that 8.6 billion chickens are killed just in a year, just in the United States. 99% of them live in what are called factory farms, where one huge problem is overcrowding. As you can see, the typical bird on a factory farm has less than a square foot of space to maneuver in. They're surrounded by the flesh of their fellow creatures like a wall. One problem this leads to are vices, such as feather pecking, pecking the feathers of their fellow creatures, killing them, even cannibalizing them. One way that factory farmers cut down on this is they keep the chickens in the dark for most of their lives. Another way they'll cut down on this is by cutting their beaks off. And because these animals are viewed as commodities whose suffering doesn't matter, the standard is to cut their beaks off with no pain relief, no anesthesia. A third problem are battery cages among the 3 million laying hens that are being in captivity at one time in the United States. Over 90% of them are raised in cages so small, it's basically like this. You get a filing cabinet drawer made from wire, and you put 6 or 7 chickens in there, and they don't get to leave, and they can't spread their wings. They can't engage in natural behaviors like foraging or dust bathing. It's an incredibly inhumane way to treat someone. What if you were born like that? What if your cat were being treated like that? Exhibit 4 is forced molting. After a laying hen has gotten past the most fertile period of her life, the most productive in terms of laying eggs, the standard in the United States is to starve her for weeks at a time, just so her eggs will be laid a little bit faster. This is not a practice that's common in Europe or Canada, but laws do nothing to stop it in the United States. Exhibit 5 are the brutal deaths among chickens in the industry. Not only botched executions, but 200 million male chicks are executed by the egg industry just for being male. They are consciously killed. They're killed while still conscious. Normally they're put through grinders. As you can see, these poor chicks are being put through a conveyor belt into a grinder and ground alive just for being male. Now, 95% of the land animals raised for food in the United States are poultry, mostly chickens, some turkeys. And yet the so-called Humane Slaughter Act doesn't even apply to poultry. Note the injustice. Note the speciesism. And suppose that you met a veterinarian or found out about one that was treating dogs or cats in any one of these 5 ways, cutting them without anesthesia, for instance. Do you think that they would keep their license very long? We have to fight against speciesism just like we have fought against racism and sexism. We need to fight this as a society and as individuals. The most important call to action I have, the most important thing we can do, is to support the small yet growing sector of animal activist organizations. Heroes like the Humane Society of the United States, which does outreach to corporations, to governments, to change policies, to protect animal rights and welfare. The heroes at Mercy for Animals do investigations of factory farms to reveal to the public injustices that would otherwise we would be ignorant about. And the heroes at the Humane League do effective forms of outreach to educate the public about these kinds of injustices. Animal charity evaluators estimates that donations to the most effective animal advocacy organizations can save up to 10 lives per dollar. So this is a highly effective way to give our support, to donate, and to get involved with these organizations. It's not just through nonprofits, however, that we can make animals' voices heard. This is a picture of the Earthlings March, which happens every year now in August in dozens of cities across the world. People are standing up for animals, their welfare, and their rights. But animals need us to speak for them faster than we're doing. Some 3 million animals are going to die over the course of the talk I'm giving, and they need us to speak for them. They also need us to be the change. That's why we have to reduce our personal meat consumption. Now, I know you'll have some questions about this, and I'd like to address at least 3. The first question you might ask is, what difference can I make as one individual? The answer is, the typical American is responsible for the deaths of some 406 animals every single year. That's 28 chickens, 2 further land animals, and hundreds of fish and shellfish. Most of the fish will be fed to the fish that will actually go through the American's lips. We have to remember that supply is driven by demand, and when we vote with our wallets, we're asking for animals to be bred, regardless of the conditions that they're being bred in. When it's over 1 animal per day whose death we could be sponsoring, every meal becomes an ethical issue. Question number 2 is what I'll get to in a second. First, we should realize that certain products are more ethical than others. So if you were to cut out just fish, eggs, and chicken, that would do about 80% of the work of going fully vegan. Keep in mind, these are organisms who are much smaller, so to get the same amount of product, you have to confine a whole lot more of them and kill and harm a whole lot more of them. Now, I'm not advocating going out and eating lots of beef, because for one thing, beef is highly unsustainable and degrading to the environment. We have to cut our meat consumption. Now, what about humane meat? Very common question. The answer is, if there is some scenario where you can get the remains of someone who lived a long, happy life and with minimal suffering, that's pretty much a myth, very distant from the typical consumer, any typical consumer today. What we have instead are corporations that make minuscule improvements in the welfare of still suffering animals, and then they market this like it's blessed by St. Gabriel. Let me give you an example. Cage-free, free-range, pasture-raised, these are all labels that still allow 3, if not 4, of the 5 injustices I've mentioned, whether it's overcrowding, the mass culling of male chicks, cutting of beaks with no anesthesia, even forced molting. And if you have a third-party organization, they still might not be enforcing things right. For example, the New York Times recently featured an investigation of a supplier of Whole Foods. Inside the supposedly humane farm, dozens and dozens of birds were found in conditions of filth, disease, even having their beaks cut. The one way to make sure your meal has the minimal cruelty in it is to make sure that it's meat and animal product free. Animals kill each other, you might think. So maybe this justifies us somehow killing animals ourselves. Well, the difference between us and predators like lions, tigers, and bears is that we're moral agents. We can appreciate considerations like justice and equality. We can understand how others' suffering gives us a reason to change our behavior. And as moral agents, we do have a mission to respond to the suffering of others. And I want to tell you, I want to assure you, this mission is easy. It's easy because it's just all about habits. What my message is level up your compassion. Take your eating habits up a level, and I'm going to give you 3 levels. So level 1, if you level up to reducitarianism, you're just going to go a few extra meals a week, meatless. At level 1, you discover that there are tons of foods we already love that are vegan versions, whether it's burgers, burritos, pizza. This is vegan chili that I made with my own hands. It's got wheat gluten in it. Some reducitarians include Pastor Rick Warren, and his flock of 15,000 church members who went on a reducitarian diet. They also reduced their waistlines by quite a lot. Oprah and her staff did something similar, and Arian Foster is just one athlete who succeeded at the highest level on a mostly meatless diet. Weekday vegetarianism is level 2, basically taking your vegetarianism to most of the time. Now, 16 million Americans are vegetarian at least most of the time, and here are 3 famous ones. At this level, you get used to finding awesome vegan and vegetarian food, like all of these things, which are completely vegan and can be found at Sweet Pea Cafe right here in Tallahassee. And at level 3, you've got vegetarianism and veganism, taking your animal product reduction full-time. 8 million Americans are already vegan, and here are 2 of them, and then 1 honorary American. At this level, you start to learn there are so many foods you never would have tried if you hadn't tried this, whether it's falafel, tofu, awesome smoothies with almond milk, or recipes with portobellos, kale, and peanuts. You can find more vegan food at a Veg Fest near you, such as the first annual North Florida Veg Fest on April 4th in Cascades Park. I think you'll find that the best vegan food is known as the vegan hot dog. Wait, okay, this is not a vegan hot dog, but it gives me a great point to end with, a point about the lens of justice. When you put on the lens of justice between buns of bread like this, you won't see food anymore, you won't see meat. What you'll see is someone's body, the body of someone just like Cedric, the body of someone just as innocent as Snow. So I'm asking you, put on the lens of justice. See a world where nobody's rights are optional, where everybody's suffering matters. Level up your compassion by supporting animal rights advocacy, including by sponsoring less cruelty in the coming weeks. Thank you very much.